A very good morning from South Africa, and a very, very warm welcome to all our panelists, the CSIA members, and our partners, and also the members of the audience that's joining us from all over the world. My name is Zara Kassim, and I'm the CEO of the Corporate Secretaries International Association Limited, also known as CSIA. We're very excited today to be collaborating with the Trialogue team to bring you this webinar, The Role of Corporate Secretaries in Embedding Sustainability in Organizations. Sustainability has long moved beyond the phase where it was a mere buzzword and often seen as a moral imperative. It has now become a strategic necessity and a critical element for the long-term success and longevity of organizations. So today's webinar is actually, the second phase of a global thought leadership project that we have embarked on with Trialogue. And today we will be discussing some of the insights and findings from the global survey on integrated thinking as a tool to embed sustainability in organizations. We also have panelists from South Africa, from Australia, as well as Dubai. And so we'll be looking at some of the regional perspectives on the approach to define purpose and also how to embed that into organizational strategies. We'll also look at very often the dilemma between compliance-driven ESG and ESG integration, the value of trade-offs in integrated thinking, and importantly, the role of the corporate secretary in driving integrated thinking and ability in organizations. Following today's webinar, we will be analyzing those insights, and we will then be hosting an in-depth workshop on the 13th of October, so diarize that date. And then we will be taking a deeper dive into the topic so that we can extract further insights and practical approaches. And that will be compiled into an informative paper, which will highlight the principles required for integration and the role of the corporate secretaries in leading this process. So I hope you will join us for the workshop and share your own experiences, which will provide a valuable contribution to our research. So before I introduce our moderator for today, I would like to share a few words from the CSIA President, Sushila Menon. You can please just play that slide.
Greetings from Malaysia. I would like to express a warm welcome to each and every one of you. We are delighted to be collaborating with the Trialogue team on this global research series, and we look forward to the insights that this webinar will contribute to the next phases of our thought leadership project, which is the workshop and guidance paper. There is a growing awareness of social and environmental issues and calls for increased transparency, and this has led to the rise of the corporate secretary. As the custodian of corporate governance, the role of the corporate secretary has evolved to that of a trusted advisor to the board to facilitate information sharing and communication. This sector has grown tremendously over the last few years, from the time CSIA was launched in 2010 to provide a unified voice for corporate secretaries and governance professionals across the globe. As the global voice of corporate secretaries and governance professionals, CSIA connects governance professionals, corporates, and governments to share research and knowledge to address the governance trends that concern the sustainability of organizations. Recent global events have shown that for organizations to survive and thrive in these dynamic times, effective governance leadership is required. The corporate secretary is the key driver of governance to equip organizations to be resilient, accountable, and sustainable. Integrated thinking can enhance the ability of the corporate secretaries to provide strategic advice and facilitate informed decision making. This collaboration with Trialogue will provide CSIA members and the broader governance community with the most relevant and up-to-date information pertaining to integrated thinking. The insights from the series will provide a deeper level of understanding and context. Please enjoy this seminar, and I do hope that today's event will provide you with the insights to help you navigate your sustainability journey. Thank you. Greetings from Malaysia.
Thank you, Sushila. And just to give us a bit of an overview of the agenda today, we will be starting with a presentation of the findings from the research, which will be followed by a panel discussion on the topics that we will be covering today. And our panelists will be sharing their insights on their experiences. After the panel discussion, we will then have an open forum where we will be able to take questions from the audience for specific panelists or for the group at large. So please do post your questions on the Q&A tab. That will make it easier for us to find the questions. And anytime during the webinar, we really will welcome your inputs. And we will then wrap up the section with closing remarks. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce you to our moderator for today's event and our partner on our global research series, Mr. Nick Rocky. Nick has over 20 years of consulting and research experience across many markets and industry sectors. And Nick plays a lead consulting role in the field of sustainable business and CSI. He plays a lead consulting role in the field of sustainable business, and has worked in a wide range of corporate clients, providing support for strategy development and implementation, stakeholder engagement, and reporting. I will now hand over to Nick. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you very much, Sasha. Thank you. I'm going to just whiz you through a few concepts and then take you through some of the research findings. But before we get into that, just from a contextual point of view, a little bit of a perspective on integrated thinking. So firstly, I think as alluded to in the opening comments, the world is definitely shifting towards integrated thinking and sustainability as an imperative. It's driven by the massive size and influence of corporations today. I was reading in a news blog this morning how Novo Nordisk, as a pharmaceutical company's capex exceeds the GDP of the entire Scandinavian region, just to give you a sense of size and scale. So companies are very much part of the solution and can be part of the problem, and the need for them to be involved is paramount. This shift from shareholder to stakeholder capitalism is now entrenched. With multiple ESG codes and standards, which we'll allude to, this stakeholder centricity and the interests of stakeholders and organizations and the need for transparency really driving a purpose agenda now. And we are seeing companies now re-establish purpose as a sort of departure point for why the organization functions, where it exists, what it aims to achieve. And that little diagram on the right just shows that the relationship between purpose and sustainability, and how these two can really coincide to achieve long-term sustainable growth. Purposes are not always equal. We know that sometimes organizations talk about what they do, crafty words that are on a website or in the company reception, but business on the side, business as usual, etc. As opposed to some organizations now which are really trying to entrench and understand a deep purpose within the organizations, really looking at the raison d'etre of the business, how to inform strategy so that you're not getting a disconnect between what you're saying is your corporate purpose and what you do as a company, and ultimately driving that as a strategic imperative. And then likewise, ESG is treated differently in different organizations, and we see a lot of activity, compliance-based activity, data-focused activity, ESG, really being driven off a need to actually say things about what the company does, but not necessarily entrenched in the organization. As a result, a lot of sometimes frustration, the anti-ESG movement sort of saying this is it's not adding any value, it's not meaningful, we can't differentiate, versus at the top end a more principled or integrated based approach where ESG is entrenched in the organization in terms of what the organization does, and it's measured, managed, and really integrated as part of business as usual processes. So those are just two perspectives. If you combine them and you say, well, if we've got on one hand, let's say a convenient purpose, and on the other hand, you've got this sort of compliance-driven ESG, and I'm not suggesting that every company is in this position, but this is what we do see in our work out there. That being the case, you've got this sort of what we're calling the missing middle, the change management process that really sits in the middle around strategic integration, realignment of incentives, managed processes. And that's, to us, what describes the integrated thinking part of this exercise, is really how you connect these two concepts of ESG and sustainability. And we believe that ESG, and purpose. And we believe that sustainability and ESG represents a mechanism to driving purpose through an organization, so it doesn't get stuck at the in a crafted statement and not embedded into the organization, and that ESG doesn't get stuck as a sort of data exercise driven for the need to show numbers. But these concepts are linked, and sustainability and ESG becomes a means to achieving and driving purpose. And if we put that into a framework, which we've done, we end up with this approach. And this is a view. It's not necessarily the only view. It's a view that we've developed in association with a company called Thomson Harrison in the UK. And it really starts it's a flow. We've looked at a variety of different codes and standards, the ISO standards, various governance codes, etc., and embedded them in this framework. And what it starts with is this notion of purpose and strategic ambition as the departure point. No business can fundamentally shift without leadership endorsing and mandating that shift. So the leadership piece comes next. Once that ambition is expressed with an understanding of the external context, the leadership gives it the mandate that's required. And then what makes it really happen and embed in the process is the governance and the structures and some of the mechanics of how you drive sustainability through an organization, through stakeholder engagement, materiality, adoption of codes and standards, and the like. If you're going to move something forward, you've got to measure it, and ideally measure it in a way that you can look at your relative performance, you can benchmark over time, etc. You can manage it. And if you embed these processes into your structures, you can then assure. Often, if the data is sort of loosely collected, it becomes very difficult to build confidence or assurance around that data. And finally, the communication, not just in the integrated report, but across all communication platforms. So ideally, at a results presentation, the CEO can talk coherently about the purpose and the sustainability process, and it's not reduced to what comes out in let's say a sustainability or integrated report only, and it's embedded in the way the company communicates with all sorts of stakeholders, as opposed to coming at it the other way. And a lot of our experience in the early days was driving the change management process off a reporting imperative, and ultimately you can only go so far, and you tend to get stuck going from right to left as opposed from left to right. So that's just a little bit of context. We ran a survey based on questions, a few questions, which I'll go through, representing each of those different principles in the framework. We got results from across the world. The results tended to come from companies that were slightly smaller. So I think that's important to recognize in the feedback that these issues are often mature or more matured or more invested in integrated thinking in larger organizations. Obviously, smaller organizations are not exempt and also are driving this agenda, but that's the profile of the sample, not necessarily representative of the CSIA profile, but what came back. The findings, I'll go through this quite quickly. The findings are, I think, not that differentiated, so you'll get a sense of what comes out. What we've done is we asked certain questions, and we used a 5-point Likert scale type response to gauge to get a profile of the level of thinking. So we had superficial, non-existent, and we've combined those scores in the pink bar on the left. We've got progressive, in other words, we're doing something, or we know something, or we work in progress, which would be the middle bar, and it accounts for a large portion of the response. And then those that perceive themselves to be advanced or leading in the space, we've combined those scores to be in the purple bar on the right-hand side. So first is your level of understanding of integrated thinking, and about 30% of those that answered the question felt that they had a progressive or advanced level of understanding. Then we asked them whether they felt this was important in terms of embedding ESG and sustainability in organization. Nearly half said that was. I think that's surprisingly low. Obviously we're invested in this space, so we think about it a lot. But I really do believe that integrated thinking is the way to embed sustainability in an organization. But that's just me. I might be biased on that, so I think that number's probably low. And then the importance of the corporate secretary in terms of embedding integrated thinking. 2/3 saying yes, some saying progressive, but mostly agreeing that there is a strong role for the corporate secretary in driving these processes through organizations. And then a few slides on some of the questions. So the first principle, really looking at this purpose and strategic ambition, external environment, purpose as the degree to which purpose is driven proactively, how it's aligned to business strategy. So we asked questions on that. Company's purpose reinforces holistic value creation. Only a quarter thinking that it does. Not necessarily conforming to that sort of opening pitch that I made around purpose and alignment to integration. Company's purpose aligned with its culture and strategic ambition, more saying yes, some saying to some extent. And executive leadership has assessed trade-offs, and we can maybe unpack this a little bit more. It's one of the sort of issues that we would typically look at, and that if you have a purpose, that purpose and aligned to the strategy, there may be some hard decisions to take in terms of that extent of that alignment, and how the business, any required business trade-offs or shifts to achieve that alignment, and has executive leadership, and that can only really happen at an executive leadership level. Has it happened? And a quarter saying, yeah, that does happen at a progressive or advanced level. At the second set of questions around leadership directive, so there we were really looking at the visibility of leadership, the leadership commitment, the application of purpose-led strategy to divisional function teams. In other words, have you devolved these functions down into the business? And the diversity of leadership is what we would look at. We asked questions around has the executive board provided a mandate and direction for delivery and purpose and strategy? So here we're saying 41% yes. Not everyone agreed that purpose was the mechanism to drive these processes, but 41% is yes, absolutely. The board has provided that direction. The company's purpose is all communicated, integrated in decision-making at all levels. About 1/3 saying progressive, the advanced at least, or integration, and the bulk saying progressive. It's happening, but not necessarily has to the extent required. Has leadership ensured that purpose is not compromised for short-term gains? Again, a similar pattern in terms of response coming out of that. So, the response is important, but also it's, I think, useful to reflect in your own businesses as to where your position is on this on the spectrum. Operational structures. So we're starting to see these are the sort of issues and sub-issues that we looked at. I won't go through all of those, but really looking at as I said earlier, the mechanics of sort of driving sustainability into the into the process, double materiality, adoption of codes and standards, and the like. So have organization structures, systems, and processes, are they in place to support the effective delivery of this purpose-led strategy? About a third saying yes, progressive at a good level, strong level, that's happening. And then, some saying really superficial or no real integration. And obviously there's space for improvement there. Clear lines of accountability where there's these issues have been devolved to management, slightly stronger response there. And company ensures that its purpose is embedded in governance structures and processes. And again, a marginally stronger response on that score. And then around metrics and management, and it's quite interesting if you read one of these sustainability reports, often you find there's good detail on some issues and a very moderate detail on other issues. But you can always assess the maturity through the level of data and the analysis of that data in a reporting process. Comparative stats, time track stats, benchmarks, etc., targets in place. And you can see whether there's a real understanding and a driving of that issue through the measures. So this is an important in terms of providing evidence of the extent of integration within organizations. So companies measures and manages its performance. Again, the bulk saying progressive, about a third saying, oh no, we're advanced in this space. Company ensures its performance metrics are integrated and aligned with purpose. So you're not just measuring things, that you integrate these and you bring them in to the sort of ultimate purpose. Similar sort of profile on that. Company has a clear outline as to how the accuracy and reliability of non-financial data is managed through processes and blended assurance models, slightly stronger there. So we know how we're tracking the data. And again, the bulk saying or a high portion saying that there's room for that it's progressive. In other words, it's happening but could be improved. And then finally, the communication piece. Here we look at the extent to which communication is holistic and consistent, and does the company communicate its purpose and sustainability to performance to external stakeholders. And again, this sort of common third coming out is progressive, and the rest either non-existent or working towards it, and ensures that the communication is accurate, holistic, balanced, and integrated, and a similar pattern coming out of that. So that's feedback on some of the ratings from the research that was run. If we just aggregate and put a score to those ratings, and just weight it, so give a 100% score to a rating of leading practice and a 0% score to no integration, and then aggregate those results across the different questions that we asked. What you're seeing is that purpose embedded into governance structures comes out at a score of sort of 58, so just better than half. And at the bottom end of the rung, the company's purpose reinforces holistic value creation or generation, only 48%. So very much a sort of middling type response, with that, and you saw that with the sort of consistent perceptions of those felt that they were really leading or advanced, and those that felt they were still progressive, and those bars didn't shift substantially across the different issues. So just to summarize some of that, there wasn't a huge amount of differentiation, of maturity across issues. Our observation, and I don't want to contradict the research, but just to provide a view, we typically find very different levels of maturity across these processes within organizations. And so we would expect to see a slightly more differentiated response across some of these issues are really difficult to embed and take a lot of time and resource and to do so, and some are sort of more easily achieved. But we do see that differentiation. There's an overriding perception that organizations are on top of these issues. Again, we think that the complexity of embedding some of these practices is underestimated. and often we find that it just takes longer and more resource than companies sometimes anticipate at the front end of these processes in terms of integrating them into the organization. We noticed that smaller companies dominated the response, but there wasn't really a difference in maturity noted by size of business. We do note that adoption by smaller companies is typically easier. There's less structures and layers to work through, but also typically those smaller organizations would prioritize these issues at a slightly lower level than the large corporates, which are subject to a lot more scrutiny and regulation and sort of peer pressure, stakeholder pressure to shift behavior. Larger companies, more complex companies often have pockets of excellence, so they prioritize this, but that we find that the integration and level of maturity is not often universal. It's typically happening, but at different stages through the organization. But what did come out is that sort of the rating and understanding of integrated thinking kind of correlates with the sort of level of maturity of thinking within an organization. So those that said that they really understood this did better than those that did typically scored, or when you break the sample down, typically scored better than those that said they didn't have a good understanding of it. And I think that's fairly logical, even though the differentiation wasn't that high. So that's a whiz through the research. It gives you a sense of both the issues and the response to that. And I'm going to hand across to the panel now for some opening comments. And we're going to, I'll introduce the panel members one at a time. So we'll start with Karina, who will give you a little bit of a perspective. Karina Wessels is Executive for Governance, Legal Compliance, and Sustainability at Alexander Forbes. She's an admitted advocate to the High Court of South Africa. She's a fellow, past president of the Chartered Governance Institute of South Africa, as well as a past president of the CSIA. She's an accomplished executive at Alexander Forbes. She's been intricately involved in their group strategy, but also is an executive responsible for sustainability in the organization. She's also co-authored numerous publications on governance-related topics. So, Karina, if you can, your camera is on, you can unmute and then give us a perspective from you. So, thank you.
Nick, thank you very much. It's wonderful to be part of the session this morning, and thanks to Zara as well. It's great to be associated with the CSIA still and participate in the events. And, Nick, I think as a start, I'll say that, specifically the missing middle that you spoke about, as well as the 5 principles, really resonated with, I think, our approach to integrated thinking and just entrenching sustainability more broadly. But just as an overview of specifically over the last while, what we've done in the sustainability space is that, I think, as to be expected from a listed company in South Africa, our governance processes were quite mature, but the rest of our approach to ESG and sustainability was quite fragmented and silo-driven. So we, made a purposeful strategic shift roughly about a year ago, where we decided to assign, central accountability for sustainability. And that's not just, our own sustainability or our own ESG practices, but also specifically how we advise clients and the views and perspectives that we give clients on ESG and sustainability. And that's when I took over the executive accountability for sustainability as well. And during this period, that was quite fundamental in, framing our approach and framing our thinking was specifically designing our sustainability intent that's very clearly linked to our corporate purpose and our corporate strategy and how we create value. And also, carefully considering our sustainability beliefs and how that reinforces, how we create and sustain value. So to drive this and execute on this, we established what we refer to as the Alex Forbes Impact Center of Excellence that's focused on sustainability. And this group of individuals are, multidisciplinary. It's a multidisciplinary team bringing together the brightest minds, in sustainability in the business. And together we drive the sustainability strategy and our execution. And as I said, both internally, but also, as we advise clients. And I think when we talk about purpose a little bit later on, I'll also, love to show the participants a video that really speaks to how our approach and our purpose and our strategy is fully aligned, and how that has really contributed, I think, to our ability to execute on this objective. Thanks, Nick.
Thanks very much, Karina. I'm going to now introduce Imran Fakan, who is CEO of TraceSec in Australia. It's wonderful to have a very internationally dispersed representation on this panel. Imran has operated at a senior management and board leadership level across a variety of different sectors in the Asia Pacific region. He's a fellow of CPA in Australia, CIMA, if you pronounce it like that, in the UK. He's currently serving as CEO of TraceSec in Australia, and he, I've got to add this in, is known for his general collaborative impartiality, connections, and unconventional quirkiness to getting things done. So we're going to expect some unconventional quirkiness from Imran this morning. Imran, over to you.
Thank you, Nick, and hi, everyone. I'm delighted to join all of you. I just want to refer to something that Cecilia said in her opening remarks, right? As a director on both listed and unlisted boards across Australasia, Southeast Asia, and South Asia, I have looked upon the corporate secretaries that I have worked with to be two things, really. A trusted advisor to us, directors, and also to be custodians of our sustainability initiatives. Because directors, they change quite often, and they should, like good chefs. But the corporate secretary and the function of corporate secretary is in many ways a permanent function. And so we look towards these corporate secretaries to be sort of like a conscience of the board in terms of integrating and embedding ESG practices into the organization culture and the culture of the board as well. The Australasian, that's Australia and New Zealand, we are a very complex, highly regulated kind of market, right? But some of the boards I serve in Southeast Asia and South Asia are less regulated, but more ambitious. So it's very interesting to deal with corporate secretaries in different parts of the world, because I'm pleasant to surprise how well they come to the table in terms of the board requirements, in terms of fulfilling our obligations to people, planet, and also our investors as well. So in my initial remarks, I just like to say that I'm very heartened by seeing 63% of the respondents see their role as being important in embedding ESG within organizations. And I think we as board members look forward to that partner in this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Imran. And now to our third panelist, Zaina Samankia, and she is Vice President of the Okama Institute for Corporate Governance. Zaina has 15 years experience in this field of governance. She's advised boards on governance matters and implemented, I think, practically implemented frameworks, which is always it's a level up on advisory. In her most recent roles, she's worked as a governance officer, board secretary, and head of investor relations at a listed national bank in the UAE. So I'm going to ask Zaina to give you her perspectives. Thank you very much. If you can just unmute there.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Zahra. Thank you, everyone, for having me today. So I think what I would like to do is to put a little bit of context into my experience in terms of both as a board secretary and in terms of advising boards. Definitely, we see that integrated thinking is, from my perspective, is being pushed from the governance angle. and we find this to be quite effective. The region, the MENA region, is currently under a lot of pressure by the country's governments, who are moving away from the oil exporting model and looking more to have a different role. Economy is built or driven on diversification, on knowledge, etc. This, in turn, have put very ambitious visions, net zero targets that the companies have to catch up with. The structure of the companies, many of them, or at least the biggest of them, have also these governments as shareholders or stakeholders. This puts also the stewardship at the forefront of this discussion. Not only has this pushed the agenda of sustainability, but also strategy in terms of also making sure that these companies no longer have the purpose of only generating revenue. There's a lot of that. They serve a purpose. A lot of them serve a strategic purpose, national safety purposes. They have a deeper meaning that these companies and their boards have come to understand very well. In addition to that, companies in general have been maturing, and as such, they are competing not only regionally but internationally, whether in terms of operations, whether in terms of acquiring companies, M&As, activities, etc. This requires the companies basically to have proper strategic planning and strategic direction in terms of safety, in terms of sustainability, in terms of basically everything, because they're not only competing for finance, capital, they're also competing for talent, competing for the technological competitive advantages, and that kind of this has naturally pushed companies to adopt a more critical type of thinking to be integrated. Not necessarily in the framework, because we know that the principles would say not in that structured way, but that move has been very smooth, very clear. This is because of what I call the power of purpose-driven boards. Because the regulations have focused so much on governance, now you have not only purposes of the company, you have purpose-driven boards or leadership as well, because the relationship between the board and executive is also taking a lot of prominence. So the boards are asking the right questions. They're asking about strategy. They're asking not only strategy, but strategy formulation. They're asking whether the IT strategy has been incorporated, whether the risk has been taken into that, whether you have the people strategy, etc. So this has been also translating in different forms and small steps in terms of integrating all of these and running thinking basically of this. I see that you have the management I see that when you go to a strategy, and instead of just having the CEO present the strategy, you have the different sections, and then you have the management come in and debate with the board and themselves. So it definitely is a change, definitely improvement. Maybe not in the most structured way, but a lot of development happening as we see it in the region.
Thanks, Zana. So unfortunately, your sound's still a little bit echoey, so you're coming and going a little bit on that. So just apologize to people on the sound, but I think we got the sense of what you were saying. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and if I can. Find out how to do that. And then I'm going to go and ask the panel to, sorry, you got my, Okay, let's just, if the panel can, what do you see, Mendoza? And switch their mics back on. Sorry about that. Bit of, we're struggling a little bit of technology. Anyway, so I'm going to just, there we go. I'm going to ask a few questions and just ask the panel to come in as they want, as they wish. But firstly, a question really on your experience with ESG in terms of maturity, and if you can refer to the sort of any aspects where you feel maturity has been more advanced, and where maybe some of the stumbling blocks are. And Karina, maybe if you can come in first. You know, where you're seeing the gains, and where you're seeing the barriers.
Thanks, Nick. You know, perhaps I'll talk a bit about our journey, you know, specifically, and what we've learned, and you know, how we've approached it. So I think, you know, thankfully from our perspective, we've always focused on the substance rather than, you know, merely working towards ticking a box. But that being said, you know, I think it has definitely resulted in less structure within certain process components, which then, you know, in turn results in unnecessary extra effort and time wasted, specifically in the collection of data. So, you know, what we've specifically done over the past 2 years in maturing our process is to focus on streamlining our data collation, and specifically embedding some of the processes. You know, I referred to the sustainability or the impact center of excellence earlier on and how we initially started looking at our sustainability intent and our beliefs. Part of that was the design of a sustainability management framework, which, you know, started with the purpose, the mission, you know, and the values as the North Star. So I think, you know, very similar to your 5 core principles, and starting with the purpose and the strategic ambition. Linking that to material matters, and as I said, coupled with our intent to impact and specifically our sustainability beliefs. So, you know, I think that balance is important between, you know, focusing on the substance and focusing on, you know, what it is that you're really trying to achieve from a sustainability perspective and integrated thinking generally, but also looking after the data components, that not just to have the data and to report on the data, but actually to have data that influences decision-making and better decision-making. You know, something else that I think was key to us in this maturity journey was, you know, reminding yourself that you can't be everything to everyone. You know, at the outset, we also spoke about the myriad of reporting guidelines and standards and codes that often drives a compliance-driven, you know, type approach to sustainability. And what's important is that, you know, not all of those are as relevant to your business, and are not as important to your stakeholders. So, you know, for us, some of the key lessons were choosing which are the most significant ones that you know, we want to align with, and that, you know, we want to integrate into our thinking. And those, and, you know, and you need to think about that in your relevant business context. And of course, you know, you spoke about stakeholders at the outset as well. A critical component in deciding which of those, you know, should be material for you as well, is looking at your peers and looking at, you know, what your stakeholder expectations are. And then I think secondly, very important, is to recognize that it is a journey, and that it's not something that's going to happen overnight. And, you know, you need to start the process. Something else that I think is probably a universal issue in many corporates, which was a challenge in our environment as well, was the manual nature of a lot of the data. And, you know, even where you had digital data, then the integration of different systems, you know, with different data sources. So, you know, in terms of our continued maturity, it definitely, you know, is, as I said, focusing on entrenching some of these processes, because although the holistic thinking and the approach and the strategy is there, you know, to be more efficient around these processes. So, you know, of course, looking forward, some of our considerations are thinking about the potential implications IFRS S1 and S2. Also, still continually engaging with regulators, in our specific environment, like the Prudential Authority, the JSE, etc. So still a continually maturing process, but hopefully on track to meet stakeholder expectations and show our progress along the way. Thanks, Nick.
I mean, you talk about data and the need to look at it, sense check it, understand the data, and the difference, the barriers to that being one of them being, the disparate systems that are in the organization. But what we sometimes find is that just getting the business, people in the business who are all time stressed, to come on board in terms of providing the data, to taking it seriously. Is that something that you've also come across in terms of just getting the mindset of sort of providing the data, looking at it, taking it seriously, etc. Is that something?
Of course, if you're measuring the right metrics that's linked to your strategy and your purpose, those are the things that business teams should be managing and thinking about on a daily basis as well. I think that is easier to collate and people understand that easier. Then, of course, we know, there are components that are annual reporting components that you need, once a year because it's important for a stakeholder that may not necessarily be an internal stakeholder. I think in those instances, it's a bit more difficult to get business aligned and excited about it. And I think that's why it's important to be practical and pragmatic about it. There are those components where it's part of business as usual activities, and it's the key items, as I say, that business needs to, in any event, manage and monitor on a daily basis or on a weekly or monthly basis because of them managing the business effectively. But those components that you need once a year, and you can avoid getting business deeply involved in those, and you can have administrative processes to collect that data, absolutely do that, so that you don't overburden business with metrics that are really not relevant to them.
Sometimes less is more, and maybe the principle that if it's important, you got to manage it and you got to entrench it, and then you really have momentum behind that. Thanks. I think Zaina and Imran, if you can just keep your cameras on, and then you're also welcome to come in on the back of any comments or respond as we go. But Imran, your take on that particular issue. Where are things maturing? Where are some of the blockages from your perspective?
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Nick. I think where it's maturing across the three areas where I play and work in is compliance. If something requires compliance, whether it's in Australasia, whether it's Southeast Asia or South Asia, it gets done. What really is not really working out, which is I think a whole list of things, is alignment with corporate goals and values, and then that being part of your ESG strategy. I think that there's failure across the board. And I'll give you an example, a safe example from the mining industry in Australia. We talk, for the mines that they operate, they have very high standards of ESG and also governance. But we have a huge impact of where our coal and our the kinds of stuff that come out of our mines, where they are sent to, and the kind of countries and the companies that use them. Well, that is really not measured. So our impact goes well beyond our continent. I don't think there is a real understanding of the impact and the kind of aligning that with values. I mean, other parts of the world also, I think there's issue. Now, there was a classic example yesterday. I was talking to the managing director of a company that runs a hotel chain, right, in South Asia and Southeast Asia, and he, they are pioneers of ESG implementation, in this part of the world. And one of the things that they were talking about is, the hotel has no gates, right? Because they feel that the hotel chain is part of the community, and that's an amazing, and everything is recycled, the whole works. But they realize that they operate their hotels in and around, natural and parks, right, where there are animals who are in not so good conditions, and over tourism is a big problem. They're asking themselves, look, everything we do, is in line with compliance, but being in particular locations and in the impact that we are having, do those align with our values and long-term goals? That is where we're failing, and that conversation is really not happening even in mature markets, right? And in mature markets, and also there seems to be the data is too good to be true, to a point where there are genuine concerns about greenwashing and complying and putting out the data just to satisfy investors and particular stakeholders. And I think that's a genuine concern, because there lies the challenge where there will be a loss of trust in the entire process, right? And I think we've begun to see individual companies being called out, and there are huge fines coming for the kind of greenwashing that is happening. So I think the industry itself and the whole process of sustainability is going through a metamorphosis, and it's an interesting time to see it. I think so. Anything that has compliance is working. Anything else that has values and goals, it's not. And also there's the issue of data. Everybody's talking about data, but I think one of the particular things that I want to highlight is lack of access to data for SMEs, right? Small and medium-sized companies. Remember, globally, 70 to 80% of the companies are SMEs. And while the number of people who have answered your survey seems to be a majority of SMEs and not the big companies, when it comes to access to data, you realize the opposite of it, right? Big companies do actually have access to a lot of data, while the small and medium-sized companies are struggling to get the kind of data they need, for this process.
Thanks. I mean, you raised two interesting concepts: this sort of balance between compliance and going beyond compliance, and how easy it is to compliance. But I mean, my view is that compliance sets the baseline. That's what the hygiene, the starting point. But really around integrated thinking, it's moving beyond that. You can't comply. It's very difficult to build a set of rules around complying to principles or values. That you need to generate momentum and buy-in within the organization. So that's, if anyone wants to comment on that, that's just interesting. And the integrated thinking really is about beyond compliance in my book. And then the other around data and greenwashing and transparency. And one can understand that the company report is ideally transparent. It tells both sides of the picture, the full perspective. But the reality is that this is a company document going out to company stakeholders, crafted by the company, owned by the company. So there's always going to be vested interests of people writing that report. But the data that one collects from an ESG point of view and in a true framework, the true data should be in an internal system, surely, that you can actually look at it, warts and all, and understand what's working and what's not working. I mean, that surely is where you want to get the data process to be. Then you can communicate how you choose thereafter. But one surely internally one needs to look at the true picture. Would you support
Nick,
that?
Sorry, Nick, if I can add to that as well, to what has been said. I think for organizations who look at ESG as at the heart of the strategy, that also makes a very big difference. And as Hawkama, we've been looking since 2007, tracking 150 companies in stock markets across MENA on 197 criteria relating to E, S, and G. And we've seen how the change has been progressing. Now, the reporting, which in this case is a result, is different from the corporation that have not embedded ESG into their strategy. So you feel it's not about how long, it's not about how good, it's not about the key terms, it's about the narrative that you see. So anyone who have read these annual reports, or they call them the sustainability report or ESG report, sometimes integrated, but they're not integrated report per se, you will know that this is a good management. There's a story. This is linked to the strategy, versus these are just a number of metrics that they're sharing with the public.
Thank you. Your sounds perfect. So we
perfect.
That's great.
Link.
And sorry.
So sorry, Nick. I wanted to say that, I think in some of the best examples I've come across is Patagonia, and I'm sure a lot of people on the call know the Patagonia story, but they were established more than 50 years ago, and in the 80s already, so quite early on in the sustainability space, they introduced more sustainable materials and production, specifically in furtherance of their mission to make high quality products, with a lower environmental cost. And some of the older callers on the line may have seen their 2011 campaign before what's the Black Friday event. They actually launched a campaign to say don't buy this jacket, because they wanted to tell consumers not to buy stuff that they don't need. And this campaign actually inadvertently helped their sales. But for years they've created financial success whilst their purpose of saving the planet steered their decisions to do the right thing. And they actually went as far as in 2018 they changed their purpose to say that they're in business to save our home planet. And as recently as September last year, they introduced that they're giving away ownership of the company worth $3 billion to the earth through the Patagonia Purpose Trust. So, I mean, some people may think that, that pushes them into the non-profit space, but they, are still making significant profits. They just purposefully directed towards something else. So for me, that really is one of the best examples of a truly integrated approach, and really, integrating sustainability and ESG into your corporate strategy.
No, thanks. And yeah, just and you can see it, we talk about reporting versus, and I think, Imran, your point, that, if it's disguised or not transparent, that report will show you that. If you know what you're looking for, you can pick up the companies that are really aligning these directives and taking it seriously, because the metrics are just so much more mature. There's a question on the chat. What do you do when you have an uncooperative, hostile board? So how do you drive these processes? It's easy when you started a company like Patagonia, and the visionary is the owner and founding member. What do you do when you're a company secretary in an organization that the board is not bought into this, that it is business as usual, that it is superficial? What's the angle of attack on that one?
Let me take a step first, Nick. So what I have seen work is that then you go to people that the board will listen to, right? And the successful corporate secretaries I have seen usually end up going to a couple of major investors that have put these board members in, and kind of sound them out and say, look, we're trying to embed sustainability in a more aggressive manner. These board members, because they are older, they don't understand the value, are resisting it. Can you help us? Now, this is not playing, the director against the investor. It's about, getting an approach in from somebody who the directors would listen to. I think that works very well. Some I have seen go up to the media and try to put pressure in a background manner. I think that's going too far, and that'll have issues. And also, I think you can also take other trusted advisors, like the legal firms that are working with the company, that goes to the board and says, look, these are the kind of legal liabilities that are coming up. I've noticed that boards take what they get from their lawyers or their auditors very seriously. So I'd say create a sort of like a partnership, a coalition of partners that the board will listen to.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I think questions coming through on the chat, in terms of the role of the company secretary, and if Zaina, maybe you want to come in here, but is this the board agenda being set, and the role of the company secretary to simply document and run the process so that it's smoothly and minuted, or proactively driving the agenda? And I think that's what you're suggesting, Imran, in terms of coercing other, influential stakeholders to sort of, work at the board. Zana, do you want to come in on any of these?
I think one of the ways that I personally would consider is addressing the issue with the chairman. Usually I find it much more easier to address one person, get his buy-in, and then have the board secretary push that agenda. That can be done through advising, raising awareness, the agenda management that you talked about, Nick, the annual workload. So when you actually add that to your agenda for the year, you guarantee that you have a time to discuss this. It's not left for, it's not competing with the time of the financial disclosures, etc. The pack structure can be changed in a way whereby a section can be added. The training, the development, the continued development of the directors could take an angle into that. And of course, the stakeholders engagement. I think Imran, you mentioned this, but it could be focused more from a number. The different stakeholders, not only the investors. You can talk about this has an impact, obviously, on customers. Yeah, this has an impact on your retaining your talent, etc. So just building that case with the chairman, and then introducing sustainability into the overall functioning of the board in a way or the other. I found it to work out, to be honest.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, I think, what was it, Imran, who said that, these boards come and go, or was it yourself? But those directors and the chair people of the board, have such a privilege and a responsibility in the time that they are custodians of that board. And they have a responsibility to look at the long-term interests of the company and getting that message across that it's not about them, it's about the prospects and the future of the business. I think that's an important perspective.
Sorry, Nick, if I can add one last point, I wanted to refer to the case of Shell that I think that happened last year, right? Whereby they were board members were held accountable for a breach of their fiduciary duties because they were not they have not approved their sustainability strategy. I use that, and not to scare anyone, but I say, hey, let's learn from someone else's mistake. And this is one of the things that also can influence acceptance.
So
yeah, I think it's important to use both the carrot and the stick, and I think the carrot definitely, as we said earlier on, in a proactive way. So not when things start going wrong, but actually, looking to the future. And I mean, I think it links to one of the other questions. Is the secretary the waiter of the board? Definitely not the waiter, definitely the forward-looking individual that sees the future and looks for the future and guides the board, as a result. But just one thing that I wanted to add as well, Nick, is I think everything starts with a trusted relationship with the board. You can have carrots and sticks and the education and everything else, in your pocket, but if the board doesn't trust your competence, capabilities, your insight, and your advice, you're dead in the water. So really building that relationship from the outset with the board, that they actually respect your opinion and your views well enough, even if it is bringing an external expert into the conversation, but that you've chosen right with respect to who you bring in and what they add to the conversation. So, critical component, I think, for every corporate secretary.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to just introduce another thought. Sort of this, if you look at the value creation model that's sort of contained in IIRC, I think they talk about your 6 capitals, preserving capitals through the organization, and in that they talk about trade-offs. And maybe this is just a bugbear of mine, but I often feel that these integrated reports, those trade-offs have all been sort of created by the reporting team for the purpose of describing the value creation model, but they're not really ever considered as true trade-offs. Less financial capital, more manufactured capital, or whatever the case is. It's kind of post-fact, if you like. What's the view in the room around looking at purpose, looking at strategy, and saying there may be some misalignment, there's some key trade-offs that we need to take. Are those discussions, because that has to be a board level discussion, surely. Are those key discussions happening? Are they being encouraged? Karina, you're in the board, you're close to the board. What's your view on that?
Nick, I fully agree with you. You know, I do think this is an aspect that can definitely still mature, especially when it is those long-term implications and decisions. And specifically where, you know, the short-term benefit to a certain capital or a stakeholder may be positive, but that short-term view drives a certain decision, but the impact and the payoff may look very different, you know, when you consider it over a longer period. And I do think, you know, a lot of our boards sometimes spend not enough time on that longer term view, also driven by the kind of metrics that we have, the kind of incentives that we have. I mean, we know that sort of short-termism, you know, view that often plays out. But I mean, doing this properly definitely enhances the quality of decisions. So, you know, I think even if you get to the same answer that you would have had you know, thought differently about the payoffs, you know, knowing why you've decided something, understanding it, documenting it properly, and being able to justify your decision, not just now, but also into the future, you know, I think is, and why you sacrificed, you know, one interest or impact for another, I think is a critical component of the decision-making process. But of course, I mean, not all trade-offs and impacts, whether they're positive or negative, are known at the time of making decisions. I mean, we know we often only see these things in hindsight. And I think that's why it's so important to have a very clear vision, a purpose, and values that guide you in any decision-making. And you know that you know, especially when the measurable impact or the longer term impact may be unclear up front.
Any other inputs on that Zainab?
Yeah, I just want to add, see, one of the things that I've noticed quite clearly dealing with many boards is that while there is you know, a lot of information, particularly financial information around you know, short-term and even historical performance, there isn't enough information about the future, as you know, Karina was saying. So one of the two other things that I have done to the boards I work with is I've actually got two things of particular two particular areas. Is one is I insist that they you know, bring experts in geopolitical risk, you know, to make sure that they are not going to trade in markets that are going to put the you know, organization and reputation on. A lot of boards resisted this, but I would say the day after you know, Russia invaded Ukraine, everybody, you know, all the boards I was working with suddenly came to me and said, you know, Imran, I think you were right. We need this geopolitical you know, experts on board. And before that, I've also been trying to get people who are futurists to talk about technology and where technology is going and how technology can help in the whole you know, measuring and sort of setting off various trade-offs. Because once the case can be made that the future is going in a particular direction, then I think the trade-offs become much more visible, you know, and that is present today. So I've actually got you know, on you know, on retainer geopolitical risk analysts and futurists on boards I work with, because I want them to understand that it needs to be you know, tackled on a regular basis. So they do get briefings quite regularly, and I think that is turning you know, the conversation at a board.
This concept
I fully Yeah, sorry, I just want to say I fully agree with Imran's view on that, is that, you know, we often focus board education on compliance and on regulatory changes, etc. But enabling them to look towards the future in your industry, you know, within the challenges that they operate, are much more critical to their success and the business sustainability than you know, necessarily checking the compliance box. Thanks.
So that need to look ahead, I think it's imperative. And then another point I'm taking out of this is this short-term, long-term offset. Invest now for a long-term future, and incentive structures often are contrary to that. And people work to those incentive structures, don't they? I mean, if you're going to get a bonus by doing X, you're not going to do Y necessarily. So aligning those incentives to a longer-term sustainable agenda is important, I think. So I'm
Sorry, Nick, and I think one of the aspects that you mentioned also, and that we could elaborate a bit on it, is the reporting or the packs that the board members receive. So we've seen packs that are very lengthy, that has a lot of information, whether useful or not useful. We've seen packs that come a bit late on matters that are really key or critical for the organization. We've seen papers that do not provide context. How is this impacting my risk profile? How is this affecting my sustainability goals? How is this affecting other matters? And there's also the issue of, and this I think is very important, whenever there's uncertainties of or areas that are not clear, I think this needs to be highlighted. So when you are presenting for something that critical or that important, I come in very honest about the areas that we don't have enough information, so that when someone is taking that decision, they know it's an informed decision, but on that area there's a bit less visibility.
That's such an important point. The board might not recognize what they're not getting in terms of information that's presented to them. They have a good look at what they get. And what you're also saying is sometimes the way that that information is presented back up to the board is not necessarily holistic, covering all material issues in a balanced way. We talk about having a dashboard where you can drill down and understand what's going on in the organization against these issues. But very often we find that the information sent up to one of the committee is basically a cobbled together of reports, which sometimes is hard to pull the information out from that.
There's a old, and I mean it's a few years old, but it's still very relevant, specifically in the context of this conversation, CSIA paper on improving board communication. And I'll definitely recommend that everyone on the call, if they haven't referenced it before, references it. It also has a case study at the end that really talks about how the role a corporate secretary played in establishing an integrated thinking approach and really reinforcing and improving the information that was presented to the board. So it is on CSIA's website. I really recommend people having a look at it.
Maybe we can send the link to that paper in the background. There's if you've got comments or questions, don't raise a hand. Just add them into we'll try and get to them. Add them into the comment space, and we'll try and get to the questions. There's a question around, do you think there should be a board member who has certification on ESG or impact investing? I know I've got a view on this, but it's not about me. So I'm going to ask the panel to talk, more broadly about the diversity of experience at a board level and the role of the company secretary in, supporting the board in making sure that there is, a sufficient depth of knowledge at a board level to enable decision-making across some complex issues. So the panel, anyone?
Happy to jump in. Thanks, Nick. Now, I think that the challenge is to meet all of the requirements on a board level. There's ESG, there's, cybersecurity, there's, cryptocurrency. I mean, there's so many concepts that boards need to be aware of and need to deal with, but you can't have an expert, in each of those areas, on the board. So, I always suggest that you start with the strategy. What kind of skills and experience do you need in order to achieve your strategy, and at what level do you need them? Do you need certain ones at a really expert deep level in order to enable achievement of your strategy? Others, it may make sense to get external experts in on occasion, or you may have deep organizational capabilities in a certain area, and your management team or certain individuals in your organization can step up when you need deep insights. That being said, I think sustainability as a concept and integrating it in everything that we do is a key skill set that is critical for boards, looking into the future. So, it may definitely be an area where you need expert skills on the board. But I think one has to, balance that with size of the board, and, as I say, ultimately with your strategy and what it is that you're trying to achieve.
So it's about the strategy, but it's also underpinning the strategy is sustainability and the material issues that are relevant to the business. And some of those issues are quite diverse. If you're a mining company or in the hospitality space, those issues, and to Imran's point, you might not have someone who understands, forestry and preservation of forests on the board of a hospitality company. So do you inject that expertise? How does one manage it? Any other additional thoughts on that?
I think, Nick, if I may, I would like to add a little bit more complexity into the question as opposed to providing an answer. And this is a question that we are, at least I'm often asked. This is sustainability being looked at the board, or should it be part, for example, of another committee? Is it part of the risk or the investing committee, or should there be like a specific committee of sustainability? And if there is one, is it an executive committee whereby you have some board member or a board representative, and then you have someone from the management? Karina talked about the experts that I completely agree with. It's an excellent good step. Sometimes you have a champion that they push their knowledge, and they do that, or a champion in governance, very similar in structure. But sometimes, as well, as we see, the role of the chief sustainability officer is stepping in. So that's from our experience in the region, from the annual reports that we review, that I mentioned, that we track. We are seeing an increased uptake in that position.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I know that in South Africa, we have a social and ethics committee, where often these issues are captured, and then they spill over to other commissions, the audit and rem committee, etc. But they have a place to land, and that might not be the same in every business. Any other thoughts, Imran? Do you want to come in here?
Yeah, just a quick intervention. I think I'm totally against certifications and requirements, unless of course it's in legislation, for the simple reason that a certification is an acknowledgement of knowledge at a particular moment of time, right? So when you pass whatever that certification, your knowledge sort of got frozen, and does not really, allude to the fact that you are continuously developing that knowledge. So I think the role of the corporate secretary really is to work with the nomination committee. For me, the key aspect of getting the kind of expertise you want on the board is that nomination committee. And you need, as a corporate secretary, to keep working with the directors on that committee to get the right kind of people onto the board. Now, the nomination committee may put certain names, and then, at the AGM, otherwise, these names may not get really approved. But you've got to keep trying doing that, because that is your vehicle in. And the other aspect of how I address this issue of expertise is to expose the board to as many diverse, experts in the field as possible, because their knowledge is constantly updated, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's ESG, whether it's governance, whether it's geopolitical risk. Get the experts in front of the board and make sure that they at least listen to it. Because over time, even if they don't listen to a particular issue when the briefings start, when the issue becomes a bigger thing in the country or the markets they operate in, they will pay attention.
Thank you. Let's come back to the notion of a sustainability or chief sustainability officer versus the company secretary. Who drives who? Where does the ownership of sustainability sit? Who's responsible for driving it? Is this, you have a sustainability officer, and with the company secretary, they drive it up into the board. How does that? I'm sure that there are multiple options, all of which may be good. But any thoughts on the structures to drive sustainability through organization?
So from our perspective, is we take a stand on the board secretary not being the chief sustainability officer. I think the role is very different. I think the skill set required are two separate skill sets. That may cause limited focus, because you need to invest time and efforts and work on that in managing these initiatives or that strategy, align it very closely with the management and the overall strategy. Meeting the compliance and reporting requirements is another issue that I could think of. And then obviously the resource allocation. So the stand that we take is that the board secretary need to keep focusing on the functioning of the board, on supporting the board. Of course, that said, that doesn't mean that they don't collaborate. Probably they collaborate very closely. Today, the sustainability report, for example, in the UAE, which is a requirement to call for the shareholders meeting, need to be signed by the chairman and the chair of the committees and the internal control heads. So that does not say that the board secretary is in disconnect, not at all. But what I'm saying is that the day-to-day, other than the reporting, the day-to-day work that is requires a different set than the one that the corporate secretary has in terms of maybe legal, governance, administrative excellence.
Any other thoughts on that, Karina? Do you want to come in on the interplay between the company secretary and who's driving sustainability in the organization?
Yeah, I think it's critical for there to be integration if you really want to get an integrated, thinking approach. So, whether it is through structural integration or whether it is through collaboration, I don't think it really matters. Obviously in our context, having a single executive responsible for a lot of the components has worked, and I think it is working well. That being said, if I look at myself, I'm not responsible for the detail when it comes to sustainability. I'm not a deep sustainability expert as my head of sustainability is. As much as I don't do a lot of the detail of the on the corporate secretarial or the governance side, but I do think having a single executive with the oversight over bringing it all together is useful and does add value. But as I said, you can do that through collaboration. It doesn't necessarily have to be structural.
But it's you can't devolve the responsibility of sustainability to one person. This is it's a project management or coordination role, and then in collaboration with the company secretary to drive that agenda back up into the board to make sure that it's covered. So it's very much a cooperative process. Imran, do you want to comment at all?
Yeah, I think the intervention I really want to make is to kind of re-emphasize the role of the board. The buck stops with the board, and I don't think any individual, whether it's the corporate secretary or the chief sustainability officer, should be held accountable for that. I think the board, and singularly the board, should be held accountable for that. And then I think the role of the company secretary is to remind the board that they are responsible for it and hold them accountable to it. At the same time, the role of the chief sustainability officer is to corral all the information that the board may require and give options that the board may request. But ultimately, the responsibility should be with the board.
Okay. I just want to go to a question on the chat. With all the myriad of issues like climate change, poverty, inequality, where do organizations draw the line in terms of remaining profitable and solving for sustainability? So the age-old debate. Well, I mean, if the first purpose slide, I think, tried to deal with that, but I might have missed the issue there. But any comments on the complexity of the space and the distraction of all of these issues that companies are confronted with?
Yeah, let me dive in first. I think it doesn't really become complex if you, as Zaina was saying before, sustainability is at the core of your corporate strategy, right? It only becomes a distraction if it's a periphery, right? Whether solving, solving hunger, or whether how much emissions you have, or if sustainability is a core aspect of your strategy, you can be profitable, right? And you can solve a lot of problems. It's only when you put finance or shareholder returns at the core of your strategy does this become distraction.
So if you stay with what's material, it becomes core business. It becomes business as usual, which is what you want it to become, surely. Yeah. We have a last question, and then just invite you all to the panelists just to provide a closing comment. But when we sort of put up that framework and I reflected on some of our experience where a lot of these processes are led through the reporting process, the report being the catalyst for driving change. Certainly my assertion has always been that you think first and you report second. But any thoughts on whether the boards and the company secretary, and whether there's still this priority around what we say versus what we do, and the understanding that we've got to fundamentally shift what we do in order to tell a coherent story at the back end? Is that thinking out there? Is it understood? Is it mature? Where are we on that?
Nick, I really do, agree that we started with the tail wagging the dog. And that being said, I don't think it was a bad thing at the time. I think we needed reporting to drive change. It would have been great if organizations themselves recognized that they needed to change, but that wasn't happening at the time. So, I mean, I think 10, 15 years ago, it was the right thing that we started at the back end. And I think, there definitely are some organizations that are perhaps still a little bit stuck in that, or are less mature in terms of their processes, as we referred to earlier on. But, as we see, stakeholders having a bigger voice, a lot more focus on social license to operate, reputational challenges, all of those things. Again, it may be that the tail end and the consequences and the outcomes that have reinforced the need to change, but organizations are changing. And I think the more and more they change, and the more the board looks at things differently and starts making decisions differently, they start recognizing the benefit and the true value, of a changed process. So yeah, I do think we are maturing, but we're definitely not there yet, I think, in all respects.
Thank you. Imran, Zaina, any thoughts on that issue?
I think probably as I completely agree with Karina, and I think the processes are the implementation of the processes and the change is the hardest, the most sticky part of it, because at the beginning you have the board asking, and then the management tries to incorporate something, they start putting the plan, but then come at the ground, put your sleeves up, and then it becomes tricky. But however, I think the reporting in a way is helping. So I can talk on a personal experience. 7 or 8 years ago, when we tried for the first time in one of the organizations I was working for to prepare the sustainability report, and it was voluntary. We got an advisor, as everyone else, a consultant. He gave us a list of questions, and I can tell you on the environment, it was all not available. On the social part, we mostly talked about charity, which is embedded in the culture, the Islamic culture of the country, and did not relate pretty much with the social factors of sustainability. And finally, the governance, which I was responsible for, I was very much reluctant to provide any information. So we did try to do something. Cutting the story short, the end was that we had a report that we never published. But we thought about it as a great learning curve, as a great first exercise, and it did help, because the year after we had 1 year to turn these not applicable or not available, and do more work. So yeah, the processes are the most sticky part, but I think the reporting in a reverse engineering type of logic does help.
And I think it's the same with codes and standards. It's a very clumsy way to initiate change in an organization, but in a sort of roundabout way, it does shift things forward. Clumsy, it's much, I think, more coherent to start at the debate and work down through the organization, but it does work back up as well. Okay, Imran, if you want to kick off with the last comment in response to that question, or any final thoughts from you, and then we'll go through with final thoughts from Karina and Zaina, and then we'll hand back across to Zara.
I think just to add first to the comment to what was discussed, what gets reported gets done, right? So reporting, unfortunately, is a critical component of every sustainability effort. How you report may not necessarily have to be constrained by an annual report or some that regulatory format. It's about effective communication. So I think that's what I wanted to get out of the way. What I tell boards and any investor is, look, we all live on the same planet. And if you think that, you could be like Elon Musk and get on a rocket and, escape this planet, I think you are delusional, because, Elon Musk hasn't still flown in his own rocket. So I think it's very much that we are of this earth, right? I'm an accountant by profession, so I understand the value of financial disclosures more than you can imagine. Money is very critical. Returns on investments are critical. But I've begun to, change my narrative as a person, right? Where I've begun to understand that, sustainability put at the core of your operations and board deliberations then becomes strategy that leads to profitability. And I think I want to just quickly conclude by saying, I think that's what you need to drive the board to understand. Start with new directors, because they are the most malleable. They are the ones most likely to listen to you as a company secretary, because they're just getting onto the board. Then work yourself through other directors and also work through other stakeholders to get the attention of the board. But remember, ultimately, the buck stops with the board, and your responsibility as a corporate secretary is really to help them achieve their mission and also to hold them accountable as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And a very quick, we nearly out of time, but 30-second close from Karina and then Zaina.
Yeah, I can't say it better than Imran, so I'm going to use the opportunity quickly to share my video, which really speaks to how we integrated purpose and strategy and everything together. And I'll close with that.
Okay.
Hopefully you...
Connection. It's in the human touch, a reassuring voice, understanding and truly seeing each other. The feeling of belonging. It inspires us and empowers us. Connecting powerful insights for a shared understanding creates clarity from complexity. Connecting sparks new relationships and ignites old ones. It starts new conversations, unlocking the power of advice. Connection, driven by purpose, resilient to circumstance, makes an impact on your life, helps you make your impact. At Alex Forbes, we pioneer insight to provide you with advice that connects your decisions of today to your impact tomorrow.
Thanks, Karina. It's a nice close. Connection coming through is a very strong concept, and obviously it's all about that. Zaina, a very quick word from you, and then
I think Karina made it very hard for me to make it sound as interesting. So let me finish on a hopeful note. I think the responsibility is of, as everyone said, saving our planet, integrating this into our organization, because it's our organization when they're profitable is when also you have your workforce that is also, you're feeding a workforce, you're developing a workforce. So it's quite interrelated, as all the integrated thinking is all about. And I invite everyone to look not only at the cost, but at the opportunities, because I'm sure there's opportunities as well, not only from, environmental or a social perspective, but also I think in driving a viability of our businesses.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you very much to all the panelists. I'm going to just hand across to Zara to close.
Thank you so much, Nick. I think today's discussions have really just shown that it's both a very exciting time, but also a very challenging time for corporate secretaries and for everyone in the governance world. We started off with findings from the survey, which reflected that there is quite a progressive level of maturity in integrated thinking. But as the discussions progressed, it also raised the question as to, has this really been embedded holistically in organizations, or is it just superficial? So in some cases it has, in some it probably hasn't. But just I think a few thoughts that stood out for me from the discussions is that it really shows how multifaceted, firstly, the role of the corporate secretary is, but also how complex this whole issue of sustainability is. And I like what Karina said in terms of that sustainability and embedding it is really a journey. And I think that a lot of organizations are at different parts of that journey. But the important point is really to start and to focus on what are the material issues in your industry and what are your expectations or your stakeholders' expectations, and focus on that. And that will help you on your journey. So that was really good advice, I think, from Karina. I think on the role of the board, excuse me, on the role of the board, it came out very clearly that from Imran as well, that this is setting the tone at the top. The board is ultimately responsible, and therefore it's important for the corporate secretary to ensure that they do have the correct mix of skills and experience, to the extent where they can afford it, and in determining in terms of their size, whether they bring in experts or whether they just have the right mix of skills that's actually on board level. But the important thing is the board needs to understand what the issues are, how it impacts on their business, and that will inform their decision making. On the reporting side, I think it's clear that it's not just about the metrics. It's gone much more beyond that. It's important to attach a narrative, and not only to attach that, but to ensure that that is also aligned to the purpose and strategy of the organization. So I think it feels like there's still so much more to say, and I'm sure that there is. So I hope that you will be joining us for our workshop, which will be on the 13th of October. And we will take a further look at the comments that were made today, the findings from the survey. So that will also be a very interesting deeper dive into this topic as well. So I think just as we wrap up, if I can just take a moment to thank all the role players for today, that it really wouldn't have been possible for us to have this webinar today. So a very special thank you to our panelists, Karina, Zaina, Imran. Thank you so much. By sharing your experience today, you help us to build, you help our corporate secretaries and governance professionals to also mature their journey. A big thank you to Nick, our moderator, for expertly managing the discussions and also making sure that we get all the different perspectives from a very challenging topic. Special thank you also to Matthew, Abdullah, the team at Trialogue. It's been a pleasure to work with you. And a big thank you to our CSIA Exco members for their contributions and support. And to our audience members, your engagement with the questions has really added value and new perspectives. And I hope that you will all leave here today not only with a broader knowledge, but also inspired and motivated on your own journey. So I look forward to having you join us on the 13th of October, so we can further explore this exciting world. And on behalf of CSIA Trialogue, our panelists, we wish you everything the best, and until we see you next month. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.